Thank you so much, Emily. Super happy to be here with everyone. I'm Nordström. I'm working in the Purview data security team, and I'm here together with Brendon. Perhaps you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, it's great to be here. My name is Brendon Lee. I'm a product manager on the Purview data loss prevention team, specializing and focusing on driving our extension into the network data security areas.
That's great. You're just the right person to be part of this call and go deeper in this data security space. So let's start off with the first slide, if it allows us. So we want to start off talking about what network data security is. And when we are approaching this, one of the big benefits around what we are doing around Purview network data security is that you're actually getting things such as classifiers, the operational processes, and a lot of other things that you have used for a long time in services like Exchange, Teams, SharePoint, into the network layer. And that is super powerful. But what do you think, Brendon, when you look at this one?
Yeah, that's exactly right, John. I think one of the really cool things here, right, is since we're extending Purview policies to the network layer, what that means is that like all of those classifiers that that customers have spent so much time like fine tuning and setting up, if it's custom classifiers within Purview, can now also be extended to the network as well. So you don't have to reset up or reconfigure any classifiers, right? Retune them. You can use those same ones that you've been using for Exchange and Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive and even endpoint devices with our endpoint DLP offering to extend that to the network, right? Which is a hugely powerful benefit, I think.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that we are open, so we can integrate with many popular SASEs and SSEs today, and we are growing the ecosystem even further.
Yeah, exactly. The way that we've sort of looked at this from a Purview perspective, right, is, we are the experts, I would say, with data classification, right? But we recognize that there's a lot of, experts out there already within the network, network capture, right, and network decryption and handling and traffic routing and steering. And so what we want to do is partner with all of those experts and make sure that they are, customers can use those experts and continue using whoever they've already used or set up for network capture and decryption and inspection, and now bring in Purview data classification and all those great building blocks that we talked about a couple minutes ago to extend those policies using those same partnerships, right? So what we're doing here is basically building an ecosystem that we can utilize partnerships with some of the most popular SASE and SSE vendors out there. Currently, we're focused on 2 right now that we have released, which are Netscope and iBoss, and we're continuing to expand that.
Great. And of course, the next question everyone is asking: why do we need network data security? And working a lot on the AI side, I hear a lot of organizations asking, well, what about embedded AI applications? What about plugins that I may have in my organization that is processing sensitive information? How can I capture those types of prompts? And that's a very common ask I come across. But there are, of course, many other things. Right, Brendon?
For sure, yeah. So, there's of course, the most common scenarios, right? A user is going to be interacting with AI within the browser, but there's a lot of AI that are also releasing desktop applications, right, and mobile applications, and even within like trusted applications like Word, users can set up or install add-ins or plugins that interact with these cloud services as well, right? So one of the big things that one of the big areas that network helps to cover, right, and provide coverage for are all these other things that are happening on the endpoint device that might not be within the browser, right, or might not be within the purview of the endpoint agent as well, right? These are all going to be basically anything that goes through the network layer is potentially able to, for us to be able to be intercept and inspect through this this network integration.
And that is super cool. And of course, we also know many organizations do use other browsers than Edge and Chrome, and they have need to cover those scenarios. Of course, you may have different operating systems. You just mentioned mobile, like iOS and Android. Do this fit into those types of scenarios where you have mobile as well?
Yeah, the really cool thing about the way that we're, implementing this is that it's based on the integration, right? So depending on the SASE or SSE solution partner that you choose to go with, and you're not limited to one, by the way, you can have multiple set up with this integration. Based on your needs, it depends on whatever they support, right? So if the partner that you've chosen to go with supports mobile, then there should be no problem with that extending to Purview, or the Purview policies extending there as well.
And that's cool. And of course, the other part of this is, of course, that this extends well beyond the AI and Gen AI apps. It really helps with a lot of other services as well.
For sure. Yes. Yeah, AI is definitely a big concern that I think a lot of customers have, just because it's so new and it's exploding, right, in terms of the usage and just the interest, the overall interest. But there's a lot of scenarios that are not AI as well that network can absolutely help with as well, right? So for example, sending emails to through personal email services, or filling out forms with like Google Forms or even Microsoft Forms, right? Like all of these other use cases which were previously blind to Purview, are now made available to be exposed and classified and eventually protected through the Purview integrations.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of organizations being concerned about things such as APIs and actually sending information over APIs that are unprotected. But all of a sudden, we actually have a tool that can detect that type of usage as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. So this is the network partner integration, and I know we have been working close to these partners. What is your take on this? What's the key values you would like to highlight?
Yeah, I think the idea behind this slide is to kind of represent how this integration, where this integration sort of fits in, right? We're not, we're sort of like extending. As you can see on the bottom, we're extending our Purview policies to these SASE SSE provider integrations, right? So what that means is that the data collection is still going to be done by that products or that integrations method. So they may, for example, have like an integrated client app that you need to deploy to workstations, or they may have like an appliance or something that sits at the network at the router layer where it's directing traffic based on that. But then as that traffic is basically being collected based on the policies that are essentially understood by the SASE solution, it's going to figure out what needs to be sent to Purview for that classification, and based on that, it's going to route that traffic over to Purview, and then that essentially sort of opens up all of, it's kind of like a funnel, right? It starts filling in all of the different Purview solutions with these really cool signals, and adding all kinds of new scenarios there that we that help expand and add to the data security product.
That's great. So we're really extending the whole data security stack into the network by doing this. So it will light up new experiences within the Purview tooling, and really help with those types of data investigations that many organizations are working with. So really data leakage and other scenarios that are key for the fast pace. Everything is moving in when we talk about AI and data overall. That's exactly really great. And I think nothing tells more than showing that, yep, we do have this.
Yeah. So today, right? Yeah. One of the, and we'll talk about sort of the steps of how this gets set up, right? But one of the, we've added this new page under the DLP settings within Purview called the integrations page. And this is where you can go and see like which partners we currently have integrations with. This is expected to expand over time. We have a few other partners that we're working on. And you'll just keep, visiting this and seeing what else gets added. And of course, if there's any partners that you want for us to integrate with, please, share that information. We'll, take that and reach out to them. We're totally open to, working with any partners that, we want to expand this and make it super flexible for customers so that they don't need to they don't need to tear everything out of their existing environment. They can use what they already have implemented, or they can choose the right partner for them, but still get the main benefits of Purview classification, and then all of the other Purview suite solutions, like DSPM and insider risk management and so forth.
Cool. Let's move on to how to set this up, because of course the first part is to enable the integration. So that part, when organizations want to enable this, of course, that starts with the Microsoft 365 tenant admin that needs to get the right type of detail from the environment and then set that part up. But I guess even before that, you also need to look at what we talked about before. Well, how do I implement this? What's the operational integration of this? But as soon as you get into the actual config, then you start off with this step. The reason you start with the tenant admin is because if you don't do that, you will not have the right IDs and other things when you get into the configuration of the network part of the setup. So you can see in step 2, it really goes over to the network admin, and the network admin using the right identifications from the tenant admin to set up the integration with the network provider. And lastly, we then move back to the data security admin and more on the data security persona to set up the collection policies that are required. So even though you have set up number 1 and number 2, you still need to set up that collection. So you may, from previous setups, kind of think, well, Microsoft is capturing everything as soon as I set something up. We actually have a new process where we are setting up collection policies. So you can decide if you want to collect information, if you want to store data for certain services, or if you don't want to store certain data. But we will get into the details in a moment. Is there anything you would like to highlight, Brendon, on top of that?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it well. The main thing is like number 1 and number 2 are generally going to be set up within the integration. So whatever partner SASE or SAC solution you go with, those steps are generally going to be configured within them, and may vary a little bit based on the partner integration. Number 1 is pretty straightforward. You're basically going to be authorizing that partner to integrate and communicate with Purview on your behalf, right? And then number 2, of course, the network admin has some more detailed configuration as far as like traffic steering and routing and things like that. Number 3 is this is all Purview, right? This is the data security admin, and this is where technically you can do this at any step. It doesn't have to be in this order. Number 3 can be done first if you want, and then you go and do number 1 and number 2. But you set up your policies to match whatever you want to classify and whatever you want to collect within this network, these network signals. And what, like John said, we'll talk about in I think in the next slides or so, what that configuration looks like, and we'll go through a demo of how it looks. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's very high level, very simple. Just requires a few different personas, of course, but it's a very easy setup to get started.
That's great to hear. And we talked about this to some extent at the first slides, but it's still super important to come back to this, that when this integration is turned on, you're getting this breadth of resources from your network. You can start to use data security posture management. You can even integrate it with your CM, those same signals. You get e-discovery and data lifecycle management on the information that you're getting from your network. You can turn on communication compliance policies to enforce and understand what's happening across your network. So if someone is sharing sensitive data, you will be able to identify that using these policies. And these same communication compliance policies can be used to trigger inside risk management policies. So you really get the full suite value from network traffic. And it's also so powerful because it enables you to use your existing operational processes on the network. Your data security processes can be used within a very short time frame. I guess you have some thoughts on this as well, Brendon.
Yeah, the way that I've been describing it when I talk to customers is it's sort of like, this where you're configuring the front door into Purview, right? But as these signals start flowing in based on the policies that you define, right, it starts to light up all of these cool things that happen within Purview. All of these Purview capabilities, both compliance and security capabilities, begin to light up with these new signals, right? So you can see when people are interacting with generative AI through like browsers or through applications or through add-ins and APIs, and that can then start to inform things like insider risk management, right? And how whether something's risky, right? Are they sending sensitive information to one of these services, and does that then sort of contribute to their insider risk management user risk score? And it provides sort of data that can be ingested or stored so that it can be managed from DLM and e-discovery, right? So even if you think about it, we're talking about interactions with generative AI that aren't normally integrated with Purview, right? So we're able to capture and store interactions with things like Gemini and Cloud and DeepSeek and ChatGPT, of course, and all of the I think over 800 generative AIs that we currently have stored within the MDA Cloud App Catalog, or classified as that. We're able to store those interactions so they can be managed, discovered through e-discovery, managed through DLM so you can set up retention and deletion. So it really like sort of unlocks a huge amount of power within Purview and capabilities that you can do.
That's great to hear. And of course, everyone is eager to see, well, how do I set up these collection policies when I got the integration? So let's do that as the next step in this case.
Yeah.
So I'll let you continue.
For sure, yeah. So these collection policies are actually a new concept as well to Purview, right? And they don't only apply to network, but network does take advantage of them in order to allow customers to scope what they actually want to include within these signals that are ingested or brought into Purview, right? So these collection policies are basically a configuration that you can set within Purview, and I'll give a demo here in a couple minutes as well, that allows you to define, what sensitive information types you're looking for within your organization. So for example, if you're only interested in very specific sensitive information types, you can totally set up a collection policy for that. Or if you're interested in everything except for maybe some very noisy sensitive information types, you can do that as well. You can also then limit down to which activities are interesting basically for network data security. And in the next slide, we'll talk about what those activities are, but it allows you to even more flexibility, right? So not only can you say which sensitive information types are interesting, but also which activities. Yeah, thanks, John. So within with network data security and also with our browser data security efforts, we sort of broken it down into 4 different high-level activities that you can capture and classify for, right? And those activities are broken down based on the direction of the traffic, which is upload or download, or basically whether you're sending content to a server or receiving content from a server, and then the content type. So whether it's raw text versus binary files, right? Such as like Word files and zip files and other types of files. So that gives us basically 4 different activities that you can configure within collection policies. That is upload text, download text, upload file, and download file. So you have a ton of flexibility in saying like, hey, I only want to collect, prompts, right, that are sent to generative AI, the raw text prompts, or maybe I only want to capture files, or maybe I want upload files and upload text, which is prompts and files that are sent to generative AI. So you have a lot of flexibility in what you detect and what we capture through these policies.
And that's super cool. So that means that we can actually apply the rich way of, for example, extracting data out of a document and identify sensitive data that was uploaded as part of that document on the network itself.
Exactly, yeah. And you have, as a customer, you have the flexibility with these policies, these collection policies now, to define what's important to you, right? So that's the key thing with collection policies, which is super powerful, right? Because you may not want everything, right? It might be just too noisy, especially with network, right? If we're talking about, network traffic that's being sent back and forth, there's thousands of requests, right, that happen every hour for every user. So you have the ability to say, I'm only interested in these specific requests, right?
Yeah, that's super powerful. So of course, the next part is, well, how do I do this?
Yeah,
Perhaps
absolutely.
you can show us.
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah.
And we'll walk through how to configure one of these policies, and then I'll pass it back over to you, John, so you can show what happens after the policy is configured.
You are in control.
All right. So the first thing to know, right, these collection policies have, I may have mentioned, but they're sort of like a horizontal policy or configuration within Purview. And what that means is they're sort of like the foundational component for a lot of things that we have that we're working on right now. And one of those things is, DSPM for AI and DSPM. So DSPM for AI and DSPM both integrate directly into collection policies and have these very quick sort of one-click type recommendations that are available that you can use to configure these policies. That way, if you're not sure what you're looking for, you just want to sort of get everything for now, which is a very common way to sort of implement sort of a new solution, right? Start with everything and then start scoping it down from there.
So that's great. So you mean that I don't have to be certain from the start. You have actually created something that I can use to start off and get to know this better.
Exactly. If you're not sure right away, then we have a way for you to get started easily with a single click within this DSPM for AI and DSPM solution, and that'll get at least get things flowing. And then from there, you can start scoping it down as needed, right? And so we have this. Trying to find the right one. There's a lot of recommendations in this environment that we have, which is one that we've been using for multiple things. Okay, here you go. So we have this one-click policy, right, that you can go ahead and create. It's already been created, as you can see, but it basically covers all sensitive information types for all generative AI applications. And I mentioned before, when we say all generative AI, we're aligning that with our MDA or Defender Cloud App Catalog. So if you go to the Defender Cloud App Catalog and you filter by category generative AI, that's all the applications that would be sort of in scope of this policy. Now, if I jump over to the solution of DLP and go to classifiers, you'll see this new section here, or this new tab here for collection policies. This is actually a horizontal solution, so it's going to be available in multiple. I think information protection also has this same classifiers sort of drop down with collection policies in it. DLM would have it. So all of the solutions that have this classifiers tab would have collection policies available from there. So you can go to collection policies. And from here, this is where you can go to create your own sort of scoped collection policy, or you can edit the policy that was created through the one click earlier, right? If you want to just start scoping it down a little bit. So I'm going to walk through just creating a new policy and show what that looks like. So I'm going to give it, some name for this policy and go next. The first thing that you're going to configure here is what kind of data you want to detect. If you remember back, when we were showing the slides, one of the first things that I mentioned is that you can use this to scope down what data is interesting to you, right? And that can be using, for example, sensitive information classifiers. So I can do content contains and then select classifiers. And from here, it automatically applies to all classifiers. But if you need to, you can go in there and totally scope it down. So you can say, I'm only interested in, for example, very specific classifiers, maybe like US financial information. Or if you want, you can also say, I want to exclude some classifiers. So a lot of times the all full names, all physical addresses are considered somewhat noisy to some customers. So this gives them the opportunity to scope down and say, look, I want to know what sensitive information is in my environment. I just don't want to, see some things that are irrelevant to me or my organization. So you have a lot of flexibility here in how you, what you can target with these policies in terms of what data to detect.
Ooh.
Now, the next thing that you're going to configure is the activities. And if you remember, we talked about those 4 activities that are available for network, right? Where upload text, upload file, download file. And you'll see them sort of here in a more, friendly manner where we describe what they actually are, which is text sent or shared with a cloud or AI app, file uploaded or shared with a cloud AI app, text received from the cloud app, or file downloaded from a cloud app. So you can select those 4 activities which apply to cloud apps and generative AI sources and add them.
Great. So now I have the actions. Of course, the next part will be to select which ones I want to have included, right?
Exactly. So now we've scoped it down to specific sensitive information types, right? Or data. We've scoped it down to specific activities, and now we want to choose which locations or which, we call them data sources, but which locations we want to scope this policy to as well. And you can hit add data source, and you can jump over to the unmanaged cloud apps tab. And this is what I'm talking about with our integration with the Defender Cloud App Catalog, right? So we're pulling all of these, 40,000 or I think, 34,000 apps that we have within the Defender Cloud App Catalog and making them available to you here to configure within the policy. The really cool thing about this, of course, is that, you don't have to worry about like what is the URLs that might be, interesting for something like ChatGPT or Cloud or any of the other generative AI. You can just say, I'm just interested in ChatGPT, or I'm interested in Cloud, or I'm interested in Google Gemini, right? And select that, and we'll take care of the mapping from the application to the interesting URLs behind the scenes for you and make sure that they're updated automatically whenever things change, of course. I can also search here. So maybe I'm interested in Google Gemini. I can search for and select Google Gemini with this as well. The other cool thing that we've done here is add this adaptive app scope capability where you can say, look, right now I'm interested in all AI apps, right? And this is basically saying all apps that are categorized as generative AI within the Defender Cloud App Catalog. I want to target that with my policy, or them with my policy. I think there's over like 800 or 900 of them now at this point. So you can select that as well as sort of what we call an adaptive app scope, which means it adaptively expands as new apps are added to that category. Once you've added the apps, you can, of course, scope based on who you want to apply the policy to. You can hit, for example, edit scope, and maybe you only want to start with a handful of users or a handful of groups. You can do that here, or you can, of course, apply it to everybody except for a handful of users or groups, or everybody within the organization. The one thing I wanted to also call out here, right? You can also say, I want to, apply the policy to a specific group, but then I want to exclude specific users from that group, right? The key thing about these collection policies is we're giving you tons of flexibility, right? Tons of ability to scope however you need, however it meets your needs as an organization to get the data that you and the signals that you need within Purview.
And then the amazing thing in this case is we don't care about the operating system or anything else, because we are looking at the network itself. We're not looking at it from devices.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. The operating system, all of the device specific I guess, attributes are not really relevant here because we're just defining the policy that should match the network traffic, and whatever partner integration you've set up, that's what's going to, read and understand this policy and then know what to send to Purview for classification. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. This next setting here is, I mentioned before, we can make some of these signals, some of this content available for e-discovery and data lifecycle management, right? And communication compliance and some of the other Purview solutions, especially compliance solutions. And this is basically the capture setting, which allows you to specify whether, based on whatever is detected with this policy, right? We basically said all AI apps. So basically all interactions with anything classified as a generative AI app can be captured and stored within Purview so that it can be discovered by e-discovery, managed by data lifecycle management, and so forth. So you have the ability to choose whether you want to capture it or not. This setting only relates to currently AI prompts and responses. So, if you were to also add Gmail to the policy, of course, it wouldn't include all emails that are sent through Gmail, but it would include anything that's interacted with like Gemini or any of the other AI.
That's super good. And of course, from a privacy perspective, in some cases, you may not be allowed to capture the content, and in other cases where you actually have a service and it's defined in agreements between employee and employer that this type of information is captured, it's all fine to capture this data to be used for security purposes.
Exactly, and that's exactly the great thing about these policies is you have the choice and you have the flexibility. So if you have, for example, some requirement where you can't capture these interactions, maybe like for your users in Germany, let's say, right? You can create a policy specific to the Germany users and say don't capture content for them, right? But if you want to capture that content for maybe a different group of users, such as the US users, you can create another policy, then exclude the Germany or apply it specific to US and then choose to capture it, right? So you can create multiple policies and you can create, multiple different scenarios in which define how you want this to sort of operate within your organization, providing max, flexibility.
That's great. And as always, I always tell everyone when you do something like this is that be aware, do a good balancing exercise before you select to not store the information. Make sure that you have balanced the risks versus what you're getting in personal freedom, because it's always important to make that balance before you just turn something off or turn something on.
Exactly. Yes, 100%. So the next setting that you'll need to configure within these policies is whether you want it to be detected through our browser efforts or if you want it to be detected through network or both. This is basically, the way we see it is that most of our policies that apply to network are also going to probably apply to browser, right? Because you're going to want to be able to detect ideally through the browser, and then anything else that's outside of the browser, for example, maybe or in like an unmanaged browser or through an application, you want also coverage through network. So it allows you to sort of have that full coverage control of the web requests, right, or anything that's being interacted with cloud apps from that point. So you have the ability here to turn on or off, your whichever integrations you want. Default is both on, but you can always turn off one or the other as needed. All right, and I'm going to just keep this policy off for now. You have the ability to come back to it later if you're not quite ready to you can save it and come back to it later if you're not quite ready to turn it on. Of course, we get a nice review screen, and I'm going to go ahead and create the policy. Awesome. And then after the policy is created, as I mentioned, right, when we talked about the steps 1, 2, 3 of the configuration, you can do this first if you want, right? And so we added sort of just a next step reminder like, hey, don't forget to go and enable and configure a network partner integrations. And we gave you a quick button that just jumps you right over to that integrations page within the DLP settings, so that you can from there choose and learn more about each of the different integrations that we have partnered with. So here's the two that we had in the screenshot. You can click Get Started or Learn More for each of them, which takes you out to sort of their documentation, which talks a little bit more about the configuration from their end. So that's pretty much the collection policy configuration and sort of getting started. John, do you want to sort of show what it looks like after?
So let's take a look at that and how it looks after completion. So this is from DSPM for AI, and we are looking at the reports pane. In this case, it's a test environment. So we just lit this one up, but you can see I have traffic for ChatGPT and Google Gemini in this case, so you can get that type of insights directly from your network. The cool thing, of course, is that you also see the classified content. So you see I have credit card numbers going over. I have physical addresses and other details. So you start to get that information about what's happening on my network beyond what I can see from the endpoints. Other pieces you will see is that this data is also going into insider risk, and you can also look at it and correlate it with the insider risks overall. So if a risky user is sharing sensitive information, well, you probably want to know about it. So you are able to get that view from within this pane. You see the different cards here. You see that there's no risk for this specific user, and of course you can then go deeper into the individual solutions to look at the details. We've already looked at the policies. Let's switch to the Activity Explorer. So in Activity Explorer, well, I was signed in. In Activity Explorer itself, you will see that the app access comes from the network. That indicates that this was captured using the new network data security integration. So that's something that you will start to notice when you look at the Activity Explorer itself. And of course, if I click on one of these, you can see I've had these credit cards being shared. And if you have the right permission, again, in this case, I don't have the right permissions. If I go and look at the prompts themselves, I will not be able to view the prompts because I do not have the right permissions to view the prompts. But I do have the ability to see that, well, I've found credit cards, full names, physical addresses, and other detail in this data that has been shared with ChatGPT or Gemini in this case. And it doesn't stop here because, sure, this is super powerful. The way we usually see it is that someone is seeing an incident in inside risk management. They may see something in DLP. They may see something in one of the other experiences. And what they then do is they switch to Activity Explorer to get more information about a specific user and how they use it. But the cool thing is that this is not only integrated in that way. You also have the ability to look at these signals directly from advanced hunting. So in this case, I have just called on the same events using AI app interaction. So these events that you're seeing from Activity Explorer, happy days, I need to authenticate again. And if I run the query, you will see that I get the AI app interactions for today. And when you drill in and look at the raw event data, you will get all the details that you need, the user ID, the Copilot event data, and you can see this was ChatGPT. And another thing you can see is also the app identity. So this is the app identity of the integration that we have with the Netscope in this case. So the cool thing is that you can identify as well that it came from one of these providers. So you can start to create your own custom views if you have this in your CM, or if you want to pivot in different ways using hunting or Power BI. Another part that is super powerful on top of what we just looked at is that we talked about e-discovery. So let's have a look at that as well. We'll likely have to authenticate once again. And you can see here I have a Gemini upload. It seems like it's associated with an old name, but this is actually the same prompt we looked at in Activity Explorer. It's the same prompt we have also been looking at when we looked at advanced hunting. But now we are looking at the actual prompt itself from eDiscovery. So you can start to do eDiscovery searches and really get this sensitive information happening on the network. And the cool thing is that you have the full associated sensitive info types in its context. So you can search for it. If you look at the metadata in this case, it's pretty interesting to see one part, and that's the content type in this case. Because when you start to look at the content types and the detail that we get from these entries is that you can actually search on only this type of content as an example. Seems like, so if you look here, the item class, IPM, Skype, Teams, and then you see the provider in this case. So this was the same provider we saw in advanced hunting. And you can do your eDiscovery and only target this item class as an example to only get network traffic. And of course, you can also search for specific providers, because we looked at the BARD in this case. You can do it based on the title, or you can use it based on how it was classified by the network provider as it was stored into Purview. I'm not sure if you have anything you would like to add on top of this, Brendon.
No, I think the key thing here is, right, it's super powerful, right? All these great signals that we're unlocking, adding data that's, you know, available to solutions, and as you can see, it all sort of maps back to it maps to each other, right? So it can be all traced back to what the user was doing, and when they were doing it, and with which website or which service they were doing it, right? It's you know, the purpose here, what we're trying to aim to do is sort of unify everything together with these cool network signals that we're now bringing in.
Yeah, and it makes it so much easier to operationalize AI, and as new scenarios come in, you can just light them up like this, and it's such a compelling way of approaching AI overall, because it may be hard to capture using SDKs like using the SDK we have for Purview for AI. That may be difficult for some organizations. So instead of doing that, you can actually rely on a network provider such as this. It's really powerful. All right, let's switch back to the slides. We talked about this one, we did the demo, and of course, this is the one that many of you are still asking about, the pay-as-you-go approach and how it works. We will leave these slides so that you can have a look at both the calculator and the pay-as-you-go pricing detail. And we are working on improvements in this space, of course, on top of what you see here. But this will help you to estimate what the cost may be when you're setting this up. I'm not sure, do you have any tips, Brendon, that organizations should take from this?
No, I mean, I think, you know, the main thing that we want to like sort of highlight here is, right, like we're trying to make it super flexible so that you can, you know, basically only pay for what you need, right? If you're only interested in using this integration for like very select generative AI and maybe very select activities or sensitive information, like that's going to sort of limit and reduce how much you have to pay overall, right? So that's the key strategy here is make it super flexible for customers to only, you know, pay for what is essentially detected and classified and you know what we look for sensitive based on those policies that you configured.
And that is the key here, that you can really select what's important to you, and only that part will be charged, and you can avoid capturing everything, of course. And if you have the requirement to capture everything, you will not well, others will not be charged for the use that you have. You will be charged for the costs that are required for your environment. So it's also about making sure that you get what you need, and others are not paying for your use, as an example. So it's also about sharing the cost amongst tenants. But we are working to make sure that this is super clear, and I think we've done a lot of work on these pages to explain how it works and why we have done it this way. And so we can't cover that much more about pay-as-you-go, but if you need help, speak to your account representatives at Microsoft, and they will be able to help you move further and get into more details. Over to questions.
Great. Yeah, we have quite a few questions here that we can go through. So based on what you were just saying, a question says, does the pay-as-you-go option have trial period to help us get an estimated cost?
So
right
it doesn't.
now, yep.
Yeah, it doesn't currently have a trial. That's definitely great feedback, and something that we'll take back and see if we can look into something like that. I know one of the big feedbacks that we are seeing from customers that is that you want to know how much this is, what to expect, right, when you turn this on. So that's definitely something that's top of mind that we're working through.
Awesome. And our next question says, does this require what was formerly called Microsoft Cloud App Security and now called Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps?
No. This is separate from that. This requires an integration with a SASE or SSE solution. Currently, Netscope and iBoss, and we're expanding that to others as well, which that's where the integration, sort of the capture of the traffic will happen, and then send it over to Purview for classification. It doesn't have any requirements on Intune or MDA or anything like that, and it's also dependent on the partner that you choose is what the sort of limitations are. So for example, the operating systems that are supported, whether it's mobile or desktop only, or the supported sort of browsers and things like that, that's all sort of driven by those partners as well. Since from the Purview perspective, we're just classifying the traffic that's being sent to us based on the policy that you've defined.
Perfect. And our next question says, regarding capturing data, I assume third-party network layer solution will be in charge of decrypting it. Purview captures what the network solution accepts to decrypt and share.
Correct. Yes, we're leaving the TLS decryption and any traffic decryption to the network providers who they're the experts in that area. So we're just going to provide classification of the data once it's been sort of decrypted inline.
Awesome. And our next question says, does the retention policy for Gen AI automatically do this, or do you need this configured to get the Gen AI retention policy to work?
So you do need to create a DLM policy that applies to that generative AI, yes.
Okay.
It won't automatically apply retention because retention requirements change and are different across the world based on organization, industry, and regulatory requirements from even government, right? So there's we don't want to force you to retain things for longer than you should or legally can, and so it's up to you to sort of define those parameters.
Great. Our next question says, will traditional network monitoring tools know about these new capabilities?
So there's nothing really changing from the when we say network monitoring tools, I'm assuming sort of on the endpoint, so monitoring network traffic. There won't be a change into how that works, today, based on if you already have a SASE provider, like one of the ones that we have supported, there wouldn't be any change there, right? The traffic is just being captured like it has been, decrypted and sent to their service. What changes is whether they send it to Purview or not from there, right? So there wouldn't be anything that is different there, whether they detect that traffic or not. That would probably be a better question for the integration partners.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And next we have, and this may be a bit out of context now, but will that feature still work if you don't use Defender for Cloud? As you mentioned that it gets the catalog from there.
Yeah, so we're just using the Defender for Cloud Apps catalog as sort of like a foundational base source of apps, right? We want to try to make it easy for customers because we want to try to make it easy and provide a single source of applications, basically. That way, you don't have one set of applications in one place and another set in another place. So we're trying to unify where we get the applications from. But there isn't any, dependency or reliance on the MDA or Defender capabilities outside of that. We're just using the catalog for this.
Great. And our next question says, how do we handle it when we have a hybrid OS model with 20% Mac devices?
Again, I think that would probably be more of a question with the with the partner, right? With the integration partner, since depending on how Macs are handled, are going to be dependent on them. When Purview gets the traffic, the device type or the OS, and other metadata is recorded, of course, as part of that traffic. But we're really just interested in the data and classifying that data from that point.
Perfect. And let's see. How do the collection policies integrate and overlap with the settings in IRM that allow us to exclude SITs?
That's a great question. So collection policies, I mentioned before, sort of like a front door in a Purview. That's kind of what collection policies are, right? They help define what is going to be captured and made available to downstream solutions like insider risk management. So yes, there are going to be scenarios where, a collection policy can be configured, which might, limit what is available or made available to insider risk management. We've tried to make this as, as transparent as possible, right? So as you're configuring your collection policies or your insider risk management policies, we have some banners that just sort of highlight like, hey, depending on what you configure here, might impact what's available to other solutions like IRM. And so you can, we can take that'll help you for now. And then, we're looking for feedback as well as how to improve that further. But yeah, absolutely. Based on the collection policies, that might impact what is made available to insider risk management policies for the solutions and the workloads that are supported within collection policies today, which are basically network, browser, devices like endpoint devices, and some of our AI stuff like Copilot experiences and enterprise AI.
Awesome. Great. And our next question says, did these policies work with MDE installed? Are there any other prerequisite software?
The major prerequisite, of course, is that network partner integration, right? Choose your network partner. From there, they may have prerequisites based on their requirements. For example, Netscope might have slightly different prerequisites than iBoss. The common one there is basically making sure or having some sort of synchronization of users from your Entra configuration to that partner. That way we can map the data correctly, right? Because we need to make sure that like when data is coming from a device, we know who that device is actually registered to in Entra so that we can map the activities to that user within Purview.
Great. Awesome. And our next question says, will the captured network traffic be saved in the tenant, and can we control the level of details?
Yes, the traffic that is, if you choose the capture setting for AI content, it is stored within the tenant and made available to eDiscovery and DLM and everything. You can choose what is stored, pretty granularly based on that collection policy configuration. So you can say, for example, I only want prompts, right, or upload text, or I only want responses or download text. Currently, the AI capture doesn't apply to files, and it also doesn't currently allow you to sort of specify which classifiers. So we just automatically classify for everything, basically, once it's been captured.
Great. And our next question says, what version of Purview is needed to perform the network integrated search?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes. What version of Purview is needed to perform the network integrated search?
I'm guessing maybe version being licensing. John, do you know?
It must be licensing. It must be yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So currently it is an E5. It's specific to E5, and then as we mentioned, it is also pay as you go on top of that. So that's the current requirements in terms of licensing.
Okay, great. And let's see here. Where does Defender for Cloud Apps fit in all of this?
So as I mentioned before, the Defender for Cloud Apps catalog will be powering sort of the apps that we use to sort of configure policies and map back to the URLs. But beyond that, the Defender for Cloud Apps capabilities are not specific or not, relevant to the network integration at all.
Okay. Great. Well, looks like that is most of our questions here. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Sean and Brendon, for being our guests today and for sharing all of this great information with our community. Also, thank you to the Q&A team who helped us with answering the questions and providing the resourceful information. To all the listeners still on the line, if you're someone who wishes to aid in the protection of the world from cyber threats and desire to have a say in shaping our strategies, blueprints, and recommendations, then we invite you to become part of our security community. Together, we can make a global impact. So join us at aka.ms/securitycommunity. This is also where you'll be notified about the upcoming webinars, events, and other announcements. For those of you who may have additional questions on the topic we just covered or other product-related questions, please feel free to raise them on our Microsoft Tech community discussion space at aka.ms/Azure Purview Community. Thank you all for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.